person, such as our wife, best friend, or we're going to be beginning our discussion of the fourth step. And please remember that in accordance with group conscience, we have strengthened and lengthened the step series to so that we're able to look at these steps from the standpoint not only of ourselves as people in recovery working the steps, but also in connection with the directions that we have and the duty that we have to carry the message to others. So we're looking not only at the steps and how they work for us, but how we teach the steps as well. Well, one other thing, if you have an AA birthday, or if you prefer anniversary in December, and you haven't given us your name or would like to celebrate with us tonight, please see Janine, and we have access to all the medallions we need, so we'd be happy to have you celebrate with us. Okay. If you have your big books, please open them up to page 63. We're going to be looking at the last full paragraph on page 63 because it is in part a lead-in to the fourth step, and also contains some information we didn't get a chance to discuss last week. Last full paragraph on page 63. We found it very desirable to take this spiritual step, that is the third step, with an understanding person such as our wife, best friend, or spiritual advisor. Now, by the way, the word spiritual advisor, as it appears here, did not necessarily refer to a member of the fellowship, and I suppose in most cases it did not, because many of the original members had spiritual advisors who were clergy or people who had some kind of spiritual connection with the member, but was not necessarily a member himself or herself. But it is better to meet God alone than with one who might misunderstand. The wording was, of course, quite optional so long as we expressed the idea, voicing it without reservation. That little phrase, without reservation, is of extreme importance. Now, of course, it's talking about the third step prayer, which we studied last week. This prayer is offered up, holding nothing back. The phrase in the fifth step is withholding nothing, without reservations. In other words, when we say to God that we're offering ourselves to Him to build with us and to do with us as He wills, we mean that in the entirety of its full meaning. Our lives we are now dedicating to God and His will. It's kind of like this: here I am, God, take me. We're not holding back our sex life or our business life or our sports life or any part of our lives. Without reservation, we're making the offer to God. Then it goes on to say, this was only a beginning. Though if honestly and humbly made, an effect, sometimes a very great one, was felt at once. Please note, this is only a beginning. And there are a lot of people who seem to make the mistake that the third step prayer is a prayer upon which, and the use of which will keep them sober. And the big book seems to run directly contrary to that. My experience tells me that that's not necessarily true. In fact, I've never seen it to be true. Because this third step is, as it says here, just the beginning. This is where it all starts. Remember last week when we were looking at the third step prayer, we recognized that we were making an offer to God which needed yet to be accepted. And that acceptance was going to come somewhere down the road when we'd done the work that we're supposed to do. Remember also that the third step is not just an entreaty to God, but is also commitment to God on our part to go forward with the rest of the steps. Going on now on page 63, this next paragraph is a lead-in to the fourth step and contains information which is quite profound and extremely necessary for us to understand. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Though our decision, that's the decision of the third step, was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once, followed by a strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. You know, the big book is entirely consistent from one end to the other. Oh, there may be some little glitches back there in the stories. Some of the news stories seem to be a little bit odd to me, but then I'm a dinosaur. And I know that. But in the first 164 pages, in the doctor's opinion and the forewords, we find total consistency. When the big book tells us, it is telling us right here that liquor was but a symptom, it means precisely what it's saying. We don't cure an illness by curing the symptom. We cure the illness and the symptom goes away. Our problem, as we have already discovered, is that we are spiritually bankrupt, that we lack the power to recover on our own, and that this book was written for us so that it would enable us to find a power greater than ourselves which would solve our problem. So our liquor was but a symptom. In another place in the big book it tells us that alcohol, that the bottle was but a symbol. And so we're looking now at getting on with this, getting down to causes and conditions. And therefore we started on a personal inventory. This was step 4. A word about inventory, guys, because we're going to see inventory twice more in the steps, aren't we? In the 10th step and again in the 11th step. If you were a shopkeeper, you wouldn't think of going into your storeroom and out in the shelves in your showroom, try to take inventory of your goods in your head. You just wouldn't do it. I suppose there are some geniuses around who could do that, but that probably isn't any of us. And so we write it down. An inventory is a written list. And so when we're talking here now about taking inventory, we're talking about doing some writing. And a business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and fact-facing process. It is an effort to discover the truth about the stock and trade. Listen to that, the truth about stock and trade. When we take inventory in Alcoholics Anonymous, it is a search for the truth about ourselves. It is not a search for the truth about others in the sense of condemnation or blame. It is not an attempt to indict ourselves. We're not here to make ourselves wrong. We're doing this to find out what is wrong with us, the truth about what's going on with us, the things which have caused and contributed to our failures in life, the things which constitute in their total our insanity, our spiritual weakness, and our emotional immaturity. And so as we do the work of the 4th step, that's what we're doing. We're looking for these things which we must find in order to be freed from them. going on. Our object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. That's, of course, an allegory for what we're doing. Our defects of character, we wish to find the ones that need to go. We will get rid of them without regret. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. Again, we come right back to what Howie read tonight. Remember, the first paragraph of chapter 5 is real important to keep in mind, because it tells us that we can't recover if we're not willing or have the ability to be honest with ourselves. Self-delusion has been one of the hallmarks of our disease. And so, if we're to be successful in recovery, we cannot fool ourselves about what's going on with us. We did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. You see, the big book is not saying first we look to see what kind of a rotten, stinking person we were. It may be true that we were, but so what? That's not the point of the fourth step. The point of the fourth step is to find out what about us. What are what's the symptomology here? What are these things which block us from God? Now, it makes a lot of sense what we're doing here if we go back to basics again. Remember, in the first step, we came to understand and to accept the fact, as a fact, in our innermost selves, that we're alcoholics and all that entails. Alcoholism being an incurable, invariably fatal, and progressive illness. We came to accept the fact that we had no power over alcohol. We're powerless. We can't stop drinking on our own. And all of the people around these rooms who say to us, just don't drink and go to meetings, they're whistling Dixie. Why would I say to you, don't drink, when I know that you can't not drink? That is, you've admitted your alcoholism. You've admitted that you're powerless over alcohol. And the big book says that our willpower fails utterly. And so we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. Being convinced that self, this is very important now, because we just studied this in the third step, remember? Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. So what we're going to be looking at now as we go through the fourth step and the fifth step is the manifestations of self. Selfishness, self-centeredness, self-centered fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, all of those aspects of self. And when you really look at it, if you consider self as being pretty much all-encompassing, pride seems to fall right in there. Pride being a manifestation of self. Overwhelming selfishness and self-centeredness, being completely immersed in self. The basics then teach us that we cannot recover without the help of a higher power because we're powerless. Therefore, the big book says that we're going to seek out this higher power. And we've just learned a little earlier in this chapter that God will relieve us of the obsession and the compulsion to drink alcohol if we seek Him. And so, searching out the flaws means that we're looking for our defects of character, our insanities, and our guilt and remorse and shame, as that is reflected in the harm that we have done others. Remember that we found out that we are the authors of our own misery, that our troubles are of our own making, that they arise out of ourselves, and an alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot. Remember, we also found out that we had to be rid of self. We had to, or it would kill us. And that there's no way of getting rid of self on our own, that we had to have God's help. We're as powerless over self as we are over alcohol. It's a powerful message that we have already assimilated in the third step. And here we have the backup. We're extrapolating forward now, being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what had defeated us. We considered its common manifestations. We call these common manifestations defects of character. Going on, resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. For we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. And now here comes the capstone. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Please, take that sentence literally, because it is literally true. One of the things which is so important for us to understand that there is nothing past God's power. I have seen miracles of physical and mental recovery which boggle the minds of the professionals. They cannot explain what has happened. But we're pretty sure what's happening here. We're looking at a miracle. Miracles are commonplace in Alcoholics Anonymous. Matter of fact, it's probably true. It certainly seems so to me that the second great miracle of our lives is when we were brought in the door. The first being when we were born. We're given something that for each one of us in here, there are 10 people out there that don't have and never will have. Why us? God isn't talking about that. But He certainly tells us through the steps in the Big Book what He expects of us, which is that we become of maximum service to Him and the people about us, to carry His message to other alcoholics. In dealing with resentments, we set them down on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. We ask ourselves why we were angry. In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore, we were burned up. Now, before we get into the resentment list itself, let's look at the four-step and see what it is we're looking at here. First of all, the four-step is designed to uncover, to reveal to us through our inventory, the existence of what I call four cardinal defects. Now, you may call them anything you want or not call them anything, doesn't matter. But for purposes of identification now, the four cardinal defects are resentment, dishonesty, selfishness, and fear. We're going to find these same defects in the 10th step inventory, and again in the 11th step inventory, these precisely same defects. When we look at the 4th step, we will find that it is broken down into 4 parts. And each of those 4 parts is designed to show us one or more of these defects as they exist in us. Remember that we're looking at our present reality now. We're looking to see what it is today that is blocking us off from God. Therefore, when we look at the first section of the 4th step, we find that this is all about resentments. There is a corollary, of course, which is that fear is always involved with anger and resentment, and we are able to see that when we do our resentment list. But basically, the first part of the 4th step has us look at our resentments. But it goes beyond that. Not only do we find whom we resent and what they did to cause our resentments, how they harmed us, what the wrongs were, but we are also given the spiritual solution to resentments. So that when we follow the directions in the Big Book, we're able to be set free from our resentments. Bill said, when asked, how do I know if I did a proper 4th step? He said, if you had any resentments left when you finished, you didn't do it right. Because we have the complete spiritual answer, the remedy, the solution to our resentments. So we look at our resentments first, and then we apply the spiritual remedy, and we get rid of the resentments, and then we go to the second part of the fourth step, which is a look at ourselves. And in that second part, we're looking for our dishonesty, our selfishness, and our fears. And we do this by looking at our conduct as it relates to those whom we resented. It's a very neat package, because when we do this, we get specific examples of the existence of our selfishness and our dishonesty and our fears. At the same time that we're doing this, we're also making a list of the people we have harmed. Remember that our 8-step list is done in our 4-step. It will not necessarily be complete, but most of it will already be done before we ever get to the 8-step itself. The third part of the 4-step is a list of our fears. And we list our fears, and we list what caused our fears, what was the threat. And then we begin to use the spiritual remedy for fear. And what the Big Book tells us is that we ask God to remove these fears, and at once we commence to outgrow fear. So we write them down, we write down what caused them, and then we ask God to remove them, and at once we begin to outgrow them. And the fourth part of the 4-step is our sex inventory. And in our sex inventory, we concentrate directly on our dishonesty and our selfishness and our relationships, especially our sex relations. We also, by doing that, are able to identify the people we have harmed by our conduct in our relationships with others. As a result of doing this, we're able to discern, with God's help, what should be our ideal for how we are to live our lives in the future, our sex lives, our relationship lives. So those are the 4 parts of the 4-step. Now then, when we do a proper 4-step following the directions in the Big Book, leaving aside entirely all of the forms, whether they emanate from Hazelton, Joe and Charlie, or the local treatment center, if we just stick with the directions in the Big Book, we will have five results from a proper 4-step. First result is we will lose our resentments. Secondly, we will commence to lose our fears. Third, we'll have an ideal for our future sex life. Fourth, we're going to have a list of all the people we've harmed, and we will have become ready to make the amends necessary. And 5, we'll have a list of our defects of character. I want to show you something, if you'll turn your books please to page 70, because many people do not realize that this is in here, and they're shocked to believe that the 8-step is actually done in the 4-step. If you go 4 lines up from the bottom of page 70, we have listed the people we have hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. Pretty clear, isn't it? By the way, when we get to the 8th step, there will still be some work left to do. We need to work out what amends we're going to make and add anybody to the list who didn't show up in our 4th step. Now, all of these things are the result of working a 4th step properly, following the directions in the Big Book. And the people who do that, and there are many, many, many of them in here tonight, know that it works just exactly that way. We don't have to worry about it. We don't have to philosophize about it. We don't have to make up anything about it. We just have to do it. And when we do it, we get the results. So now we're going to be taking a look at our resentments. Let's take an overview of resentments just for a second. Some resentments that we're carrying around inside of us have been there for years and years and years and years. We're not aware of them except in those rare occasions of deja vu when they come flooding back in. And generally speaking, we will forget them. Many of our resentments we have swallowed. The harm that has been done us in the past we have denied, we have rationalized, we have deluded ourselves into believing it didn't happen, or if it did happen it wasn't all that bad. Many of the people who have tried to help us in the past, if we've had a lot of experience with the human solution, have been trying to talk us out of having resentments, telling us things like they did the best they could. Well, that might be so, but I suspect in most cases it's not. But it's irrelevant, because you see, the remedy, the solution to our resentments doesn't have anything to do with us rationalizing away our resentments. What they would like for us to do is to compare what we did to people to what they did to us and say, oh, they weren't so bad after all. And look how bad we were. Or, I wasn't so bad, look what was done to me to make me do all these things. Either way, we love it. But the steps in the big book don't indulge in comparative fault for very good reasons. We're not talking about spiritual solutions here. We're talking about a spiritual solution to a spiritual problem. Some of our resentments go back so far into our past that we have very little memory of the events that took place. Some of our resentments are as fresh as this morning. All of our resentments have affected us in some material way, some of them severely. And so, because of the very nature of this beast, which hides out just like cancer cells and metastasizes through our psyche, it's absolutely essential that we take whatever steps necessary, do whatever we must do in order to ferret all this stuff out. If you're sponsoring people, you'll often find them saying, I don't have any resentments. You say, whoa, wait a second. You've already qualified for sainthood, I guess. Let's just see if maybe you do. Another thing you'll run into as a sponsor, maybe you've run into it with yourself. There are people who simply do not want to put the onus on other people. They don't want to make them wrong about anything. They don't want to believe that anything was done that was wrong and harmful. They want to believe that all of this goes back on themselves. And so when we ask them to determine whether what somebody did was harmful or wrong or threatening or made us angry, they're going to deny that any of that happened. The state of denial is not all that uncommon. So we have to find another way to get at that. And we do that by looking to see where they have been unfair. Well, now, if I want to uncover all of the defects of character, all of the resentments that I have, the first thing I've got to do is go back and review the important people in my life. Remember, too, that somebody who's new is having difficulty maybe with their memory. And a lot of the stuff that happened in the past we've blanked out so much that it really isn't right up in the front where we can remember it easily. So we have to have a way of jogging the memory, getting a process of association going, which will allow us then to go back with some specificity and to identify the things that were done to us, so that we're going to be able to find out where these resentments came from. And so the way that we can do that, and this isn't in the book, by the way, but this is what I do, and I'll pass it along to you if you want to use it. I recommend that we sit down first and write out the names of everybody who was ever important or significant in our life, going back to our families, parents, brothers and sisters, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, anybody who had any significant impact on our life from our family, our teachers, employers, friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands or wives, children, jailers, cops, judges, psychiatrists, doctors. The list goes on and on. Whoever has had a significant impact in our lives. When we write these names down, there's a salutary effect in two respects. First of all, it's a non-threatening exercise. We're not doing anything about it yet, so it's a lot easier to kind of ease into doing a four-step when all we're doing is writing down names. Once we have those names down, we want to identify then who it is that we need to write about. That is, we need to find out who it is on this list who qualifies for the resentment list. And the way we do that works best that I've found. We simply answer some questions about each of the people on that list. We ask ourselves, did this person harm me in any way? Did this person wrong me in any way? Did this person threaten me in any way? Did this person anger me in any way? And then we have the one more question that kind of is designed to get around any reluctance we may have. Was this person unfair to me in any way? And I can remember a couple of instances in doing a four-step with a sponsee where the only question that she was willing to answer was the unfairness question. But it turns out that her concept of unfairness cut across all of the aspects of harm and wrongs. Now, if we answer yes to any one of those questions, chances are this is the person whom we need to write about. Now, remember that we have made the list of the people who are important in our lives, and we've asked ourselves some questions about them. And with respect to some of the people on that list, we've answered yes. Yes, indeed, he did harm me. She did wrong me. I was angry at her. I was threatened by him. And she was unfair to me. Now we know what we're going to write about. You know, a lot of people have difficulty getting started with this resentment list because they say, well, I don't know, what do I write about? And the example we have on page 65 is pretty scant, doesn't give us a lot of information. See how easy it becomes once we have identified what it is that was done to us that harmed us, that was wrong. Now all we have to do is write that stuff down. Thank you, Howard. So if we go to the resentment list example on page 65, we find that there are 3, not 4, but 3 columns. First column is very simple. We write down the name of the person we resent, or the principle, or the institution. And by the way, principles and institutions, not a bad idea to look those words up in the dictionary to make sure that we know what we're talking about. In general terms, principles are those things that we were taught or which were insisted upon as being the guiding forces or guiding lights in our life, which we've come to believe were really counter to our best interests. And of course, institutions would encompass such things as the police, the church, the schools, the IRS, and so on and so on and so on. Human institutions that we may have resentments toward. Many people have no abiding resentments in those regards at all, but if we do, we're going to write them down as well as the people. But in the first column then, on the left-hand side of our page, we're going to write down the names of the people we have resentments toward. Notice at the top of that column in italics it says, I'm resentful at. That means I am now, presently, today as I sit here, resentful at. And if we recognize and we are certain that the resentment, whatever it was that we may have had in the past, is gone, we no longer harbor that resentment, if we're sure about that, then of course it's not necessary for us to write about that person. I would caution you, however, that you might want to err on the side of completeness here, because sometimes our minds will play tricks on us, and we'll think that we have been freed of resentment when in fact we have not. We don't want to take a chance of leaving anything inside of us which will grow and fester in the future, any more than we would have an operation on our insides to remove a cancer, but tell the surgeon, you can take most of it, but you can leave some if you want to. So we're going to be very careful to get it all out. The middle paragraph, the middle column is labeled the cause. Now, in order for us to know what to write there, it's very simple. We go back to our answers to the questions. For example, suppose that in the first column we wrote down Papa. Now we want to know what was the cause of our resentment. We go back to our list and we see that Papa harmed us and wronged us and made us angry. All we're going to need to do now is to write down in that middle column what Papa did that harmed us, what Papa did that wronged us, and what Papa did that made us angry. And we may find that these are one and the same acts, in which case that's fine too. But at least we know what it is that goes into that column. And we're going to do that all the way down for everybody on our list when we answered any of those questions yes to. And now we go to the third column, and this is not too well understood, but let's go back to basics here and see what we're looking at. Remember, we learned that we were looking at natural God-given instincts which had been warped and perverted by fear, so that our brains no longer work as God intended, but in fact work against us. We're looking at instincts which have been warped, instincts which no longer function as they should. Therefore, because these are instinctual matters, they operate below the level of conscious thought. We therefore have no power over this stuff, and we need God's help with it. When we look at the wrongs that were done to us, we're looking primarily to see what damage or interference was done to our instincts. So in order to find out what's going to go in that third column, it's very simple. We go to the little paragraph right above the example on page 65. On the grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries, and then we look to see what it affected. Was it our self-esteem? By the way, self-esteem is not a pejorative term in here. We're talking about our definition of ourselves. We're not talking about walking around with a head full of pride and ego. Self-esteem is that quiet belief that we're okay, that we are in fact good kids of God. So these injuries many times have destroyed our self-esteem, have so warped our image of ourselves, our definition of ourselves, that it no longer even makes any sense. But nevertheless, this is what we've come to think about ourselves, and we need to understand that these actions of others many times have crushed us. An example, of course, is the parent who constantly tells the child, you're no good, you're dumb, you're stupid, you're a failure, you're never going to make it. Or look at your brother, look at your sister, how smart they are and what they're doing. What's the matter with you? And we hear that enough, and there's very little left of any self-esteem we might have otherwise had. The next category is security. And of course, security is one of our natural instincts. Natural instincts for sex, security, and society. And when the harm that others has done has interfered and damaged our sense of security, we need to see that. The next category is ambitions. Now again, ambitions in here, this does not mean the kind of ambitions which are riding over everybody else. It's not a question of being ambitious. We're looking at the vision that we have for ourselves, the vision of where we would like to be and what we would like to do with our lives. And again, the harm that others have done to us may very well have seriously damaged our view of the future and our belief system that would allow us to go forward and to face the necessary problems and the necessary growth in order to achieve our ambitions. The next two categories, personal relations, refers to our instinct for society, and sex relations, of course, our instinct for sex. Now, the instinct for society is very powerful. You know, a lot of times we talk about our fear of rejection. We always seem to be driven toward being included in and not excluded. One of the worst things that a society can do to its members is to shun them. And there are religious societies which use shunning as a method of punishment. Read the Scarlet Letter. Look what happened to Hester Prynne when she was accused of adultery. She was allowed to stay in the colony, but nobody would speak to her. And she had to wear the scarlet A. This is like a slow death, because our instinct to be included in, to be a part of our society, to be a part of our chosen group is very powerful. And we'll go to almost any lengths to assure our place within our society. And of course, our sex relations being interfered with, here again, this is something that's going to short circuit all of our diodes and whatever else is up there. All of our synapses are going to go nuts when our sex instinct is short-circuited and interfered with. This is such a powerful instinct. We know that the sex instinct is good and God-given. We also have to recognize that it's extraordinarily powerful. And this power is something which the commercial world plays upon ad nauseum, because they know that no matter how many times our sex instinct is appealed to, the next guy or next company that comes along and does the same thing will be successful with it. Because this stuff operates below the level of conscious thought. And so when we're looking at our resentments, we are looking to see what this damage, this harm that was done to us did to our natural instincts. We need to get a clear picture of how all of this stuff works and how the damage was created to us without ameliorating or excusing or in any way fogging out what was done to us. It's critically important that we write down here the exact nature of the wrongs that were done to us, because it is necessary for us to have widescreen, Technicolor, stereophonic, and Dolby identification of these wrongs. We're going to be freeing ourselves from our resentments by forgiving those wrongs. And we need to know precisely what they are. And therefore, at this stage, we are not looking at our own wrongs, in spite of whatever forms may be out there that is directly contrary to the Big Book. The Big Book does not indulge itself in comparative fault. Quite to the contrary, it says, don't do that. Don't do that. We look at those who have harmed us first. Then we apply the spiritual remedy to our resentments. Then we look at ourselves without reference to what was done to us in the past, because we must be responsible precisely for what we have done. Now, having done that, we go down to the bottom of page 65, We went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. And that thoroughness is critical as well as the honesty. Remember now, we're going back to what we hear every time we hear chapter 5 read. We can't recover if we're unwilling or unable to be honest with ourselves. And right here, in this fourth step, This honesty is paramount. We've got to get absolutely honest with everything that took place in our lives if we're to recover. We can't leave anything out. We can't walk around ignoring things. And when we get to our fifth step, sometimes we have to be pulled up short, because there will be things that we have refused to write about and we refuse to talk about. That has to be taken care of before we can move on. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. Notice the use of the word wrong in that sentence. To conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. That's the second use of wrong. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. 3 times in a row. Wrong, wrong, wrong. People have wronged us. We have to get this through our heads here. This is what we're looking for, because the wrongs that were done to us are the root of our resentments. The usual outcome that people continue to wrong us, we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse. And then we were sore at ourselves. Remorse means that we are sorry and remorseful for the things we have done. And this sore at ourselves really is the remorse and guilt that we feel. But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. We all can identify with that. As in war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. Most of us, I suspect, and certainly it's true in my case, were plotting revenge right from the time we were little kids. I used to have fantasies about what I was going to do to that dirty so-and-so who did those things to me. And those were wonderful fantasies. And almost always they involved my being some kind of a superhuman person who could take revenge with impunity and laugh all the way home. And to some extent, most of us tried to get revenge, get back at. Do unto others before they can do unto you. All that nasty stuff. The problem is, of course, that this revenge stuff occupied our minds. It swamped us. Here's what the Big Book says. It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. We're taking each day and throwing a trash can, flushing it down the john. It is our resentments which are ruling our lives. Later, the Big Book tells us that these resentments really dominated us. But with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience. And remember that Bill used the term spiritual experience. Later, when the editorial committee got hold of the 12th step, they changed that to spiritual awakening in the 12th step only. But the meaning of spiritual experience here is the sum result, the net result of working the steps, which in the 12th step we call a spiritual awakening. That this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal. Why? How can it be that these resentments would be fatal? Well, go back to basics. We have an incurable, always fatal and progressive illness, and our only hope of recovery is to have a loving God stand between us and the booze. And therefore, when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. When we are shut off from the sunlight of the Spirit, we have no chance. Remember, the Big Book tells us we have but two choices: to go on to the bitter end or to accept a spiritual way of life, a spiritual solution. So, when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again, and with us to drink is to die. Now, where is this stuff going to be ameliorated? Well, we certainly know that by the time we reach the 10th step, these things will have been corrected. We know that when we reach the 10th step, we will have entered the world of the Spirit, therefore no longer blocked off from it, and we will have been restored to sanity. We're no longer insane. And the problem of alcohol will have been removed. It won't exist for us. And we will have become God conscious. All of these things are going to happen because we work the steps. We must, because with us to drink is to die. Go back to basics again. If our only hope of recovery is to put a loving God between us and the booze, anything that stands in the way between us and God is a killer for us. That's the basic, simple truth of it. This next paragraph is something that the human solutionists hate. They hate this paragraph because their idea is that all things which are natural are okay, and they consider that it's natural for us to get angry. Nevertheless, what does it tell us here? And this, by the way, is the truth. If we were to live, we had to be free of anger. Now that's to live as opposed to die. If we were to live, we had to. What does had to mean? It means or else. We had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm, those are the brainstorm is a sudden burst of anger, not the bright idea. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men. But for alcoholics, these things are poison. Poison. A killer. If somebody says to you, oh, well, of course there's appropriate anger, you must ask them, gee whiz, is there such a thing as appropriate strychnine? I think not. This is not an insoluble problem. Obviously, we're going to have anger come up. We were going to feel threatened out there, and we get angry when we feel threatened. But we have tools to deal with that anger when it crops up. The 10th step is our tool, and it's right there in the 10th step, and it tells us what to do. Be on the lookout for this stuff. When it comes up, take care of it. Inventory it, talk to somebody about it, and ask God to remove it. And if as a result of getting angry you've hurt somebody, make amends promptly. And then turn your thoughts to someone you can help. These are the tools that we have. 4th, 5th, 7th, and 9th steps are right there for us to use. Because these things are poison. Holy cow, I don't know where in the world this hour and a half goes. When we come back on next Saturday, we will continue our discussion of the spiritual solution to resentments, because that's what's coming up next. And then we will take a look at the list of our own faults. And we may have a chance to get started with our fears list. We're going to start with our medallions tonight. We've got quite a few folks, and I hope that many of them are here tonight. Birthdays are very special to me, and I hope they are to you. We're going to start out. Our first celebrant is Fred with 5 years. We have 2 Freds tonight. Where's Fred? Fred? Yeah, there he is. Wake up, Fred.
I'm Fred, and I'm an alcoholic. And in the 5 years, I guess the most important thing for me is to realize what Jim was just talking about before, was that alcohol is not the problem, we're the problem. And once we get to understand that we are the problem and try to take ourselves apart and understand how we make the problem for ourselves, that's getting over the hump of the biggest part of the battle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we have a lady celebrating 7 years of continuous sobriety, and I believe her name is pronounced Anika. I-N-E-K-A. Is she here tonight?
I think she's here, Jim. No, she's not here.
Let's give her a big hand. Next we have, with 12 years of continuous sobriety, Buddy. Is Buddy here tonight? Buddy, come on, Buddy. Come on down.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that boy, this is a big chip. All of them are, and I give everything to God because it's I'm not really good at speeches. He's the guy who made me, and he's the one who got me sober, and I give everything to the people in this room because everybody in here helps each and every one of ourselves. It's just a real gift. Thank you.
Okay, Brian. All right, Buddy. The next 15 years of continuous sobriety. Brian, where's Brian? Right here tonight. Give Brian a big hand. We can't pass by that 15-year mark, though. We've got another 15 years old time. Fred, come on in.
Yeah, my name's Fred. I'm an alcoholic. I can tell you how I did it real short. I've been here for 34 years. I'd have as much time almost as Jim if I had stayed. But I didn't stay because nobody was going to tell me what to do. And my life got worse and worse and worse. And finally I lost everything that was precious to me, basically a wife and 3 kids. And on Christmas Day, 1986, I told my kids I'm going back to AA. I have a picture of my last drink, believe it or not. And the deal was I'm going to do what I'm told to do. And I've done what I'm told to do, but I'll tell you what, for the first 2 or 3 years it was awful. You know, I was praying for people I hated, you know, which made no sense to me at all. Give it away, you can keep it. I remember taking a sponsor outside, told him, I'm going to give you my car, and I'm going to come back out, there's going to be 2 cars here. And I was so mad at the whole world. And but I stuck it out. And the other thing I wanted to say is I'm 15 years sober, but I come here to learn more. You know, one of the things that I found out listening to Jim was, you know, I only have so much knowledge, and you know, it just, to me is like learning the rules of life. And so I came here, and I've done the steps again because I found out I hadn't done the steps as well as I'd like to. So it's been a hell of a trip. You know, there's been some great times, there's been some awful times, but I've stayed sober through the whole thing. So that's the game for me. Thanks a lot.
Next we have a lady I've gotten to know quite well. She's a terrific lady. She's got 16 years of sobriety. Doreen, where's Doreen? You want to take her medallion for her? You're a sponsor. All right, come on out. This is for Doreen.
Thank you, everybody, for
Okay, thanks a lot, man. And then we have, with 24 years of continuous sobriety, Pauline. Where's Pauline? 24 years of continuous sobriety. Isn't this wonderful? Come on around here. There's your medallion. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Corinne. I'm Corinne I wrote down some few words that I wanted to say because my memory's still not that great yet. So this comes from my heart. I am grateful for this program, to God, and to my friends and family. I couldn't have done this without your help. So thank you all very much from all my heart and soul. It wasn't easy for me, but it sure was worth all the hard work that I put into my new life. Now I have a life, a good one. I don't have to worry about where I'm going to get my next drink, where I'm going to sleep, where I'm going to get my next meal in. And I don't have to wake up sick, and I can remember where I was the night before. I am very happy living my new life and having a peace of mind. And I thank God for helping me and for getting my faith back. Thank you all for caring and for loving me, and thank God for AA.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Karen. Okay, and there's one more. Howie wants to do this.
Yeah, there's one more. And that one more happens to be my teacher, my mentor, and my spiritual advisor. And Janine is going to present Jim with his 37-year medallion.
I'm very touchy because 2 months ago my husband had an open heart surgery. Yesterday when he passed away, he was living with us for 9 years. And I went to empty group and get this medallion, especially for Jim. I met Jim May 15 at the Pompano group. And I listened to him, and he had so much wisdom. I asked him, I said, if I asked the board, would you come and make some miracle at the 101? I've been sober here. And he said, yeah. I was very touched. And, I never forget him for that because his wisdom and the help that he do around, what he did around, like Ray did for 45 years. I think Jim is very powerful and he has the spirit, and I thank him and deeper in my heart for all the thing he do for us. And nothing I can say more. I don't know him very well, but I know enough that his soul is so deep down. And I want to thank all of you and Jim, especially Jim, for being here with us and teaching us how to grow up. Thank you. This is the special one from the group.
We have a special one from the group.
From the group.
Oh boy, is that beautiful. Look at that. Wow. Thank you so much, all of you. This is very special. And then the regular one too?
The regular one too. You get two.
Oh boy. You get 37 years, you get to have 2 medallions. Well, I can tell you that it's been a journey. It's been a marvelous thing. One thing I can tell you for sure is that all the promises you find in the big book are absolutely true. And that when we do in fact give our lives to God and let Him lead us, we have a life beyond anything we could ever imagine for ourselves. Someday I'd like to spend this hour and a half with you and go over what God has done for me in the last 37 years, the places I've been, the things I've done, the miracles that have happened in my life. It's a truly incredible odyssey, and I look back on it, and I realize that but for Alcoholics Anonymous, but for the 12 steps, and but for the grace of God, my life would have been, by comparison, dull, long, and boring, if not pure, unadulterated hell. I would say to you that if you really truly want to have a life that you've always dreamed about, stick around, work the steps, get into service, trust God. Do that, you get to have the heritage, which the big book tells us is ours, that we want. The heritage is to be happy, joyous, and free. And of these, the greatest is freedom. It means freedom from the bondage of self. See what happens in here, guys, that we get to turn our spirits loose with God's help, and they can then soar with the angels. And this is the kind of thing we've always wanted. We'll get to heaven right here. Again, to the group, thank you, and God bless everyone here. I really appreciate it. All right, let's get down to business now. Anybody who's got 3 months or 6 months or 9 months? Yes, sir. What do you? Come on up. This is Matt, everybody. Anybody else? 6 months, 9 months? Okay. Do we have any announcements for the good of AA? Any commercial announcements? Dances, bingo parties, picnics?
There's a dance at the bottom line for New Year's Eve, so if you're not doing anything, you want to see how sobriety can actually be fun for the new year. Also, bottom line, they're also doing
Good. The bottom line, New Year's Eve, a dance.
10 o'clock.
At 10 o'clock in the evening, after the meeting, I guess. Any other announcements? Any whoopee parties going on? No whoopee party. Holy cow. I thought we absolutely insisted upon enjoying life, guys. All right, so God willing and the creek don't rise, I'll be here next week. I hope you will be too. Let's close the meeting, and people in the clean room, please come out and join us. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, that's the decision of the third step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once, followed by a strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. My friend Jim here was asking me at the break about this business of don't drink and go to meetings, and most of you know my position on that. There's no such thing in the big book. And this is part of the reason. Our liquor was but a symptom. You do not cure a disease by getting rid of the symptom. The symptom goes away when you cure the disease. That's axiomatic, isn't it? Now then, let's see what it's saying to us here. We're going to need to follow through on our commitment in the third step, which was to immediately go forward with the rest of the steps. And this is telling us, do not delay. You must not, as a sponsor, fall prey to the siren song of delay and putzing around with your sponsees and There are some now who are saying you don't even clear your mind up for 5 years and all this stuff, and 1 step a year, and all kinds of absolute nonsense out there. Don't fall for any of that. Just follow what the Big Book tells you to do, and you can never go wrong. Furthermore, you'll always be on solid ground with your sponsees, because they'll know that you are following the directions in the Big Book which you have promised them you would do, and that they've got a solid reference for themselves. They don't have to wonder whether what you're saying is some kind of idea of your own, or whether this is the method of recovery which is being used by people all over the world and was used by those who wrote the book. A strenuous effort to face and be rid of. Now, to face means just what Tom read at the beginning of the meeting. This business of being honest with ourselves. We have been running from these things which have been blocking us. We've been running from our defects and our guilt. We've been running from the consequences of our drinking and of our actions. Many of us were taking one geographic after another. When we couldn't run, we drank more. The more we drank, the more our behavior became crapped out, and the more people we hurt, and the more we did to ourselves. So now we're going to have to stop all of that and face ourselves. If you want to change that word face to be honest with ourselves, you would be dead right. To face and to be rid of. Okay. We are not going to be rid of these things about ourselves by ourselves. We're going to find out, we've already found out that we can't get rid of self on our own. We have to have God's help with that. We're going to find out that we cannot be rid of our resentments on our own. We have to have God's help with that. Likewise with our fears and our dishonesties. So across the board, to be rid of these things means that we're going to have to elicit God's help to do that. Of course, that's what the 7th step is there for, isn't it? In addition to that, we're carrying a load of guilt, and we need to be freed from that as well. And that will be done when we do our 9th step and make amends. It's a spiritual step. God's help always is triggered by that. And we will be set free from our guilt if we are thorough and honest and make a strenuous effort to set matters straight. By the way, we're going to find out as we do our 4th step just what those amends are that we need to make, because the 4th step covers that. We'll do most of our 8th step list as we do our 4th step. And so now we see that we must move along here, and we do not delay. I would suggest to you that if you can possibly do it on the day after your sponsee takes the 3rd step prayer, we get them started that the same day on writing their 4th step. Strike while the iron is hot. There will be, and usually there will be some sort of euphoria that is the result of the 3rd step anyway, which means it's a real good time to move right along and get this stuff done. Now let's talk about the 4th step and what it is and what it is not. First of all, the 4th step is designed to discover 4 cardinal defects about ourselves. When we analyze the 4th step, we will find that the first part of the 4th step deals with resentments. There is, of course, in every instance, an overtone of fear, because we're going to find fear relates to all of our defects. So the first part of the fourth step is where we find our resentments. But the big book takes us far beyond that, because it gives us not only the opportunity to find out whom we resent and why, but also to be freed from these resentments. In other words, the fourth step teaches us and directs us to use a spiritual remedy for resentments. Bill said at one time, he was asked, how do I know if I did a proper fourth step? And he said, if you got any resentments left when you finish it, you didn't do it right. Now the resentment list is the first part of the fourth step. The second part of the fourth step is the list of our own wrongs and our own defects. And it is designed for us to find specifically dishonesty, selfishness, and fear in our dealings with other people. And the way it is set up, we will write that second part of the fourth step with relationship to the people whom we resented. We already have that list, and we're simply going to go back to it and examine ourselves in the light of that list. This means then that we're going to be looking at what it is that's wrong with us. Now this is the key to the fourth step. The fourth step is not designed, and you got to emphasize this with your sponsees, it's not designed as a condemnation or an indictment. It is designed to find out what's wrong with us. In other words, to find out what is blocking us from God. Just exactly what that little paragraph top of page 64 said, to find and to be rid of the things in ourselves which are blocking us. That's why we're doing a fourth step, is to find out what these things are. So the second part of the fourth step will also begin our identification of those we've harmed. And we begin the process of becoming willing and ready to make amends to those people. The third part of the fourth step deals with our fears. And in that third part of the fourth step, we thoroughly identify all of the fears that we're carrying around with us, that we came in the door with, or anything that has cropped up since then. But it goes beyond that, because in the fourth step we not only learn what our fears are and what caused them, but we begin the process of using a spiritual remedy to be freed from those fears. We begin a process of writing our fears down, writing down what it is that caused them, and asking God to remove these fears. And the big book tells us that at once we will commence to outgrow fear. When we get to the fifth step, we will have had these fears removed from us. The big book says our fears fall from us. So that gives us a little formula, which we'll talk about several times, I have no doubt. But it's simple. The fears recognized and written down and discussed with another and turned over to God equals no fear. And the fourth part of the fourth step deals with our sex inventory, and that inventory is specifically designed for us to uncover our selfishness and our dishonesties, and to identify the people whom we've harmed as a result of our sex conduct. It is also designed for us to, with God's help, craft an ideal for how we wish to live our future sex life. It has nothing to do with our future partners. It has to do with us. And it has to do with our willingness to be loving and kind and considerate and forgiving and honest and unselfish, and to demonstrate love, not simply to harbor love. It has to do with a lot of things, and God will direct us when we ask Him to. We need to write out this ideal.